Panelists, could each of you introduce yourselves and speak for 3 minutes about what makes a community safe?
My name is Mythili Fleming. I am the 9th Ward Alderperson here in the city of Evanston. This is the 9th Ward, the best ward in Evanston. I am a native Evanstonian. I know for Black folks that is important. My family has been here 5 generations. I'm the 4th generation to hold public office in my family. But aside from that, I'm also one of the founding members of Opal, Organization for Positive Action and Leadership. We are a political organization that works to achieve and mitigate the racial discrepancies in our school district. A lot of work over at District 65 needs to be done. We try to educate the community about those numbers, recruit and support people to run for office, and also make a big push at the school board, try to get them to work and get some tangible results for our students. And the question was, what makes the community safe, right?
Correct.
So obviously a lot of things make the community safe. People sometimes think of the police. I think that is a small aspect of what makes our community safe. What makes our community safe is really people in our community feeling like they are part of the community. So people need to understand that they are welcome here. There's a place for them here. Our schools need to validate its students' experience. People need to have opportunities for career growth and advancement. I am responsible for 800 and some odd people at City Hall. And people there, particularly African American people and women, need to feel like we have a place for them there. They can attain the same salary because we have a salary discrepancy at the city. And that, in my opinion, is make people feel safe. I always say people have to eat. So whether they're getting money and feeding their family from a job or they're knocking you over the head for your purse, people have to eat. We seem to think that people who don't fit in our society are going somewhere else. And I always challenge you, where are they going to go? They can't read, they don't have a job, they don't have money, where are they going? They're right here, they're still our neighbors. So we have to work together to make sure people have a place and feel like this is their place here in Evanston, so that they, don't look to rob you because they know who you are, they respect you as their neighbor, they know you respect them as a citizen here. So we can get into the rest of that later, but I will defer to my colleague, Ms. Foxx.
Good evening. I'm Kim Foxx. I'm the Cook County State's Attorney. I preside over the 2nd largest prosecutor's office in the country, which includes the great village of Evanston, as well as the city of Chicago and about 131 other municipalities in Cook County. What makes communities safe is an intriguing question that has been asked for years, and particularly from those of us in law enforcement who tend to talk about community safety, talking about pillars of policing and prosecution. But the fact of the matter is that when you think about safe communities, when you think about the time in your life when you felt the most safe, if I asked you to imagine what that felt like for you, what was around you, you're not thinking about bars, you're not thinking about policing, you're not thinking about prosecutors, you're thinking about your community. I grew up, and I have a fellow Cabrini resident here. I'm not a 4th generation, 5th generation Evanstonian. I'm a 2nd generation Cabrini Greenian. But even living in a neighborhood like Cabrini back in the 70s and 80s, where there was violence in our neighborhoods, the places where I felt most safe was in my grandmother's kitchen. The places that I felt most safe was with my mother and my cousins jumping, rope outside. Safety, the notion of safety is built around, healthy, thriving communities. It's when people feel like their needs are being met, there is less of a tendency to try to do things to meet those needs, as was mentioned earlier. When we talk about crime and violence in our communities, the neighborhoods that are most impacted by crime and violence tend to be the neighborhoods that are most deprived of those things that keep them healthy, that keep them thriving. You cannot talk about public safety and decouple that from economic opportunity. The neighborhoods that have the highest levels of violence in them have the higher unemployment rates. They have the lowest educational attainment rates. They have a lack of resources related to food and housing. Like, all of those things matter. It's not that the people there are somehow different, but communities where people are able to have basic needs met and then are able to tap into those social emotional things like not surviving but actually thriving tend to have less crime. So safety to me, public safety to me looks like a real investment in those things that allow people to thrive in their communities by having their social, emotional needs and economic needs met.
Thank you so much, Mr. Attorney Foxx. That was intriguing. How you guys doing? My name is Nathan Norman, and I am the program coordinator for the Youth and Young Adult Division within the city of Evanston. In my role, the way that I address helping our community stay safe is engaging our youth. I believe that to truly keep a community safe, we definitely need community. And what I mean by that is, just to touch on a couple points that my colleagues have shared, is that we need a community that's thriving, we need a community that's safe. To actually present that, to make that happen, we need to have inclusion between the police and the community. We need true transparency. We need to, and some of these things are going to start at the police academy. We need to include the community in panels when selecting officers who patrol our neighborhoods, because oftentimes I've saw it in the community where we have officers who are not proximate to what's going on in the community, who are policing these community, and so it's a toxic blend at the end of the day. So we have to address things like that. We have to address poverty, as State's Attorney Foxx touched on. We really have to, because what does poverty do? Poverty breeds violence, and when we see that in our community go unaddressed, we continue to see things perpetuated. And so I think key things like that have to be addressed. We have to address those citizens, as Alderman Fleming talked about, who are re-entering our society, so that they're not robbing you, they're not going through your window. We have to make them feel included in the community. So how do we do that? We need to embrace them with jobs. We need to embrace them with opportunities. We need to embrace them. We need to do what the Constitution says: upon their release, restore them back to their full citizenship. So we have to start really practicing these things if we truly, truly want a safer and better, healthy, thriving community. And I think that these are just a couple of things, but it takes the entire village, as they used to say back when I was a child. It takes a village, and that's what it takes to keep a community safe. The entire community, just not a couple of things, but the entire village. Thank you.
What are the issues you find with young people in Evanston in terms of encounters with police and courts? And also, how do you work with young people to keep them out of the prison system?
Well, one of the first things I see with young people facing issues with the criminal justice system is a lot of time a young man could be, I've witnessed a lot of young people, maybe 15, 16 years old.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Yes, sir. I see a lot of young people, 15, 16 years old, they're experimenting with marijuana, walking down the street, just rolling a blunt, and then that turns into an altercation with law enforcement, when it could have been, that turned into an altercation with law enforcement. Long story short, young man ends up, being confined, being slammed to the ground, so on and so forth, when things like that could have been addressed in a different way. And I think that we see young people being walked out of school in handcuffs, so then this becomes normalized, and then I see that happen all too much in the high schools and so on and so forth. And I think that these are one of the things when we see when our children are being walked out of school in handcuffs, when the resource officer doesn't use the proper resources in dealing or addressing behavioral issues. I think that normalizes this, and these institutions are setting our children up to be comfortable with being in jail or in handcuffs. One of the ways I work with young people in our community is I try to offer them options like jobs, options like connection to education. Whether if you out of school, you've been kicked out, then we try to help you to get in the GED program. I try to work with school districts to do alternatives to suspension, because what is a child doing out of school for 10 days? What is a child doing out of school for 5 days? They're being left to their own leisure. And one of the things my grandmother always said was, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And so I think that we have to start engaging our youth. We have to start implementing a more restorative approach. And that's something that I myself worked on in conjunction with the Moran Center. They do a great job at that, because we have to address things from a more restorative perspective to get better results. And so I think that those are just some really, really key things that we have to be intentional about in the community when working with our children and addressing some of the issues they have in the school and when dealing with law enforcement.
Thank you. How do we stop the school to prison pipeline?
I don't have the answer, so before everybody gets their pen out. So we last year, I think, or 2 years ago at Opal, we made a infographic of this because people here in Evanston, you know, we live in this little bubble that our schools are wonderful and everyone's doing great, and if you happen to go with the police, you must have done something wrong. And so we put out all these numbers, some of you saw today, going from preschool to high school to who's actually sitting in county jail, who's from Evanston. And so you see, you know, the trajectory is, if you're in preschool, as Mr. Nathan said, you know, we suspend preschoolers here in the district. For our tax dollars, we suspend little people. And then obviously, as he said, you're not in school, you're not reading. So you see this trajectory. So in Evanston, we can simply stop this because we have control of our district. We pay $14,000 per student in our elementary schools and $24,000 per student in our high schools. Our teachers are well paid and well educated. We can make different practices and policies in our schools. The state is not saying you have to suspend a 5-year-old who threw a tantrum. So we can do some different things in our preschool to make sure those students who do need supports get the supports they need, but that every student in the school is looked at as, you know, a thriving individual who has the ability to read. We know everyone has the ability to learn. And then they feel like they're comfortable in school. They have books, they have curriculum that talks about their life experience and looks like them. And then they feel welcome in that space. That is their community. They want to go to school. They don't act out. The teachers need to relate to our students so they feel comfortable. And then we just really have to be honest about who we're putting out of the classroom. So that ODR number up there is really hard for us to get. That just means office discipline referral. They don't get categorized the same way as like a suspension. But when a student is in the office, they're still not learning. They're still being confined. They're still being given the message that you don't belong here. And we know our schools are really set up for white women because you sit still and forward and you do this and you raise your hand. And boys don't really operate in that way. And we know that black boys are over penalized. So we really have to be honest here in our city about, you know, who we call the police on. People are sitting in their car. As the alderman, people call me and say, there's a man sitting in his car. I'm really not comfortable with it. Well, what is he doing in his car? I never asked what race they are, but I'm like, what is he doing? Well, he's sitting there and I know he doesn't live on this street. And I said, well, you know, he has the right to sit in his car. But we have to really have an honest conversation with ourselves about what we're doing. And this idea that we all live here in diversity and everyone's equal. It's not the treatment that our kids are getting in 65. It's not the treatment that Nathan's getting in 202. And then we see when our police numbers come out, it's not the treatment that people are getting by our police. So, I mean, I think it's up to all of us. We could stop it here in our city, but we have to be engaged and pay attention to what's happening and think why these things are happening.
Thank you. Mr. Norman, if you could address, we're going to ask this of all three of you. If we could start with Mr. Norman. What is your role in terms of restorative justice and citizen re-entry?
Well, as I just stated previously, as a restorative approach, I work with community partners such as Moran Center to go into schools and different things to try and offer options to suspension or alternatives to suspension. And I just described what that kind of looks like. What do I do to address re-entering citizens? We partner with a local faith-based organization, the Unitarian Church, and I hope they don't mind me mentioning them. And their congregation was so gracious to come up with a re-entering citizens group. And so we work with them. They meet with this re-entering citizen person who was recently released like every Saturday. And we talk about his needs. We talk about his desire to work or what that looks like. And they've helped him receive jobs. They've helped him receive his little things like his ID. And I think that while some may feel like that's kind of, they may look at that as something that's minute or mundane, oftentimes those are the same barriers that exist or stand in the way of a re-entering citizen. That is the determination if they're going to become a recidivist or not. And so sometimes people need support groups like such to help them to navigate through society upon their release. And so we felt the need, so did the Unitarian Church. They felt the need, and we have partnered ever since. And we started with this one individual, and that's been going well. And on the flip side of that coin, we also work with Moran, and we have certificate of rehabilitation programs for individuals to help restore the wreckage from their past, to help expunge backgrounds and delete old things off their records that have happened, and they meet the criteria. It's completely free, and those are some ways we are working to address issues with re-entering citizens. Thank you.
So very quickly, so people understand what we mean by restorative justice in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Most people know how the criminal justice system works. There's a crime, there's a trial, there's a finding, and then there's a punishment. That is the basis of our American jurisprudence system. What restorative justice seeks to do is how do we, repair the harm that has been caused, and how is it that the community is engaged, one, in making sure that the victim is whole, that the person who has committed the offense is accountable, but that the realization is that everybody still lives in the same community, so the community is invested in what the outcome is. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Under the traditional route, it's not the community that's engaged, it's not about real accountability. If I, prosecute someone and they never have to face the person that they've caused the harm to. If they get their sentence and they go off somewhere, the real ownership of what did I do to that person and how does that make them feel? Also, how does the person who has no connection, who's been harmed, feel like they're being made whole again? And what is it that the community needs? And so we in the State's Attorney's Office have been very invested in restorative justice. It took a lot of flight in juvenile court because we had a recognition that young people weren't going to go anywhere, right? When a young person does something wrong, if they break your window, if they, tag your garage, they're still going to live up the street from you. And what we want for them, one, is to not do the behavior again. Want them to repair the harm to the person they did, where it's better for them to paint the garage that they tagged than to go to the detention center and not really be accountable. We're in adult court now have the first of its kind in Cook County restorative justice courts that we started on the south side and have now moved to the west side. Or we started on the west side, we're now moving to the south side, and we're going to bring out to our suburban districts that allow for that model where the community members get to be basically the judge of what happens, the peers, where there's a contract that's entered into by the person who has been, who has caused harm, where they sit rather sometimes in circle with the person that they've harmed, have that person tell them, do you know what it feels like to have, worked really hard to pay my mortgage for you to come and tag my garage? Do you know what that does to me? And to have to sit there and listen to what that meant. And then say from a community, this is what we expect from you. We expect you to go and paint that garage and do some community service. There's a benefit to the community, there's accountability to him, and the victim feels whole. And I think we have to wrap our minds around that it is okay to deal with conflict outside of the courthouse. But we have to
Check one.
But we have, and I think that's what restorative justice requires, is community members who are, as was said earlier, proximate to these issues, who know what they need and want, and know that the people who have caused harm and have been hurt live in the same neighborhoods. We have to be okay with saying that there's an alternative to our criminal justice system to do that. And so we have been invested in doing this type of work and spreading this type of work so that we can focus our limited criminal justice resources only on those cases that belong in the courthouse, and things that can be resolved in the community should be resolved in the community.
So it's interesting listening to Miss Foxx, because the thing she was describing is how I grew up. You do something wrong, your grandma took you down the street to apologize, shamed you and told you had to pay for something, and But it worked. I stayed out of jail, and I didn't do it again, or else I didn't get caught again. But that's what we want for our community, but we're also not always willing to speak to the boy next door who did the wrong thing. Or we, talk about his mother because she's never home. Lord forbid she's working 3 jobs to live in this expensive town. And then we're not willing to put ourselves out there to help her with her children when she is working. So my job in restorative justice really at city council is to make sure Nathan has what he needs and make sure Nathan's team has what he needs. So we pay for the Moran Center to offer the expungement clinics, and we pay for the things that Nathan's talking about in terms of, not young people, any people who are coming out of prison who might need things, whether it's the driver's license or, the Nathan and his team, they go all around town picking people up and taking them to and from appointments and therapies and whatever else. So my job is to make sure they have what they need, and that is a job in of itself, because we don't always all agree where a taxpayer dollar should be spent. It is a task. But also at the city, and this was led by Alderman Braithwaite, was a whole alternatives to arrest program. So there were things in which the police could give you a ticket for shoplifting or whatever else, that you would go down to the Cook County Courthouse in Skokie. And we know then that starts you to have some kind of criminal record. So we were able to take what we can as a home rule community and pull those back. So instead of getting a ticket and going down to Cook County Courthouse, you get a citation and you come into the City Hall. You come into City Hall and go to our court, which is run by attorneys that we pay. And so you might get a fine, or you might get community service, or, counseling or whatever else it is. And that was really set up to help our juveniles, although I think it goes up to 23 or something like that. Because, we all do stupid stuff and some people get caught, and you don't necessarily need to go down to Cook County Courthouse and have the potential of having a record for being stupid and young. And so Alderman Braithwaite led that. We finished it. Quite a few things under Chief Eddington. He was really happy to do that. He said it's also going to save him a lot of time with the officer time, because they have to go to court too. So a lot of things we brought back in, and then we added in a restorative component. So we have social workers who work at the police department. We have victim service. We have youth and young adult. We have a plethora of nonprofits here that really came on board and are willing to have young people come in to do those community service hours, or to help them with homework or whatever it is. So that was a city effort that went pretty unnoticed, I think, by a lot of people. But when it's now been going on about 6 months or so we're going to revisit that and see how it's going. But that is one way in which, as a city, we're trying to make sure these kids who just make mistakes, and some of them make a lot of mistakes, but you can go back through this process several times. It's not like a 3 strikes and you're out, because we run it as a city. And then they also, when they do go before the judge, it's in a private chamber, which is automatic library. So they don't have to come in front of the whole community and say, yes, I shoplifted, and be very ashamed by that. They get to come in to a private setting with a parent, and even if they don't have a parent, we can have another guardian or someone with them. Some people have come and brought their teachers. So it's important for us as a city to make sure we're doing those kind of things. We actually looked at the model with Mr. Brown for the court that you talked about on the west side. We're not at the point of needing that yet, so hopefully ours takes off. But that's my responsibility for my role as city council.
What is the impact of legalized marijuana in terms of getting records expunged?
Yes, so Illinois did something rather historic in our legalization bill. We were the only state who legalized marijuana through the legislative process. It was done by referendum everywhere else. And what we were able to see was that the after effects, that they legalized marijuana in these other places, and the question became, what about the people who had records before? And in the aftermath, they were trying to figure out ways, because I think expungement was expected, of how to do that. What we did in Illinois was say, we're going to bake this into the bill. For literally, we estimate there are about 700,000+ records across the state that are eligible for expungement for amounts that are now legal. Why is that important? As you saw earlier on the graph about disproportionality in our criminal justice system, there was no place more pronounced of that disproportionality than in the enforcement of drug laws. And now in groups like this, we're an educated group, we will say blacks, whites, Latinos all use drugs at the same rates, marijuana at the same rates, right? And we'll all say yes, yes. And then you'll go to 26 in California, which is the main jail, and find that the overwhelming number of people who are in jail for marijuana possession are African American and Latino, overwhelming. And people would say to me, you say that, but I don't know. And we'd say the statistics show that you are 7 times more likely in Cook County to have been arrested and prosecuted for marijuana if you are a person of color than if you're not. And people still say, I don't know, I don't believe it. And then on December 31st, just last month, on the eve of legalization in Illinois, there was news coverage wall to wall. How many of you saw the news coverage? And they would show the lines, right? The dispensaries opened at 6 a.m. Y'all know where I'm going. The dispensary opened at 6 a.m. But they had like video of people at 11 o'clock the night before, December 31st, the middle of winter, waiting to go into the dispensary. They had hand warmers, they had hot chocolate, they had tents, they had it was jubilant. What I will tell you just from my years of experience as a prosecutor, as a human, someone who has never tried marijuana is not waiting in line in December at 11 o'clock at night. That's just, they don't do it. They don't do that. But what we saw was a wide range of diversity of people who were standing in line to partake in legal marijuana, which was the perfect visualization of the fact that the people who were standing in that line were not reflective of the people who were being prosecuted for decades for using it. And so it was really important to us that we changed, because the collateral consequences of a conviction stay with you for the rest of your life. When we started this conversation, it was about what keeps us safe. Healthy, thriving communities. People who have the ability to get housing, to go to work, to provide for their families, that makes safer communities. But if you have a conviction on your record, say for marijuana, they don't check on the application. They don't say, do you have a conviction for marijuana? They simply just ask, do you have a prior conviction? So you could be a murderer or a weed smoker, and there'd be no distinction between the two of you. And so this was incredibly important to be able to have the ability to vacate convictions in Cook County. It's not just expungement. We've removed the conviction altogether and destroyed the record. We have in Cook County the most expansive conviction relief for marijuana than anywhere in the state. We made that carve out for Cook. And that's because of that 700,000+ records that are eligible, 72% of them come for Cook County. So we vacated the first 1,012 on December 11th, and I can tell you just phonetically, and I could be wrong, in reading those first 100 names, those were names of African American and Latino men. Of the first 100 that I read, there were only 6 women. And what this historic legislation does is allow for people to be able to get jobs, housing, employment, to meaningfully contribute to our communities. This isn't charitable. And I've heard people say, well, they knew it was illegal back when they did it the first time. And I would say, I'm in Evanston, home of Northwestern. If it was really fair in the enforcement of these laws, the best place to go sweep up like marijuana smokers would be at Northwestern. And I'm not disparaging that, but when people say, no, it's easier to pick up kids on the west side for smoking marijuana, and I say, no, it's actually easier to catch the campuses, that shows the potential that they believe in people at universities who smoke to outgrow or not be dangerous criminals versus what they think of people who aren't in college campuses. So this law is historic. It is not charitable. When everyone works, when everyone is able to meet their needs, we are all safer. Do not look at this as charity. Look at this as an opportunity for all of our communities to grow and thrive.
As a follow-up question, whether employers can still refuse to hire or fire someone based on positive marijuana tests.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. This is but it's legal aspect of it. Yes, recreational marijuana is legal. It is important for you to know the restrictions on your housing and employment before you decide to partake. For example, marijuana is legal in the state of Illinois. It is
still illegal on the federal level. It is still a Schedule 1. So if you live in public housing, for example, or housing that is paid for with federally subsidized funds, you are not allowed to smoke on the premises. There were provisions that were put into the bill that allowed for employers to be able to say that they have a zero tolerance work environment. And so in the same way that I tell people, smoking is legal. Back in the day when I was a young assistant in the state's attorney's office, I had a supervisor that used to smoke in her office all the time. And I'd go in, hold my breath, and be mad that I had to wash my hair that night. But smoking was legal there. The same provisions. There are employers that have a right to say that you have a zero tolerance. There's some professions where you cannot be under the influence of marijuana and still work. So what I would encourage people is to find out what the rules are with your job and with your housing and where you can smoke. Because one of the other biggest concerns is what we don't want to see is people believing that they're following the law and still getting swept up. You cannot smoke and drive. You cannot smoke and drive. You cannot eat edibles and drive. You cannot be intoxicated and drive. Think of marijuana in the same way that you think of alcohol. Think of it the same way. You can't have it out in an open container. You can't do it around children. You can't give it to children. You can't smoke it in the park. You can't, there are all the rules that you would think of with alcohol. You can't have open containers of alcohol in the park. You can't stand on the corner and drink, a fifth or something. You can, same rules, same mindset, but be mindful of that, because just because it's legal doesn't mean that there aren't parameters around it.
What is your office doing to address racism within our local police department?
That question was probably for me. You were trying to be nice. One thing I just want to double back on what Ms. Foxx said about the employment, and I brought this up at City Council and I'll bring it up again in February when it's on our agenda. I do have a problem with it's legal but you can't get a job, and I will tell you why. Because at the City of Evanston, if you look at the demographics of not so much who we hire but who we promote, they don't all look like me.
That's right.
And some would say people we fire first look like me. But I say, if I'm allowed to drink a six-pack at night, come into the city, apply for a job, take the drug test, which we do, and I think we do it includes alcohol, I'm not going to be ineligible for the job. But if I smoke marijuana and my 3% goes towards reparations, and I come in for that same job and that same drug test, I will be ineligible for the job. Now, I get it for our police, for our fire, our CDL licensed people. We don't want that, right? They need to have a level of safety, plus there are some other conditions to their job. But we have many people who can do their job and probably do their job. They drink at night in the peace of their own home, and they might smoke at night in the peace of their own home. And I would say they should be able to work at the city and keep their job. So I have pushed that to my colleagues. I am losing. And we could be zero tolerance, but we have to apply the laws, the rules to everybody. And everyone has to have an open playing field as well, and even get in the interview. So I will continue to say that here in Evanston. But the question was about racism in the police department. So this is a tough one in that racism is an individual trait. And I always tell people I can't jump into someone's soul and make them like whoever. And that is not my job. What I want to do is make sure when we are doing performance evaluations and performance measures that we're looking at those things. Are you only pulling over women? Are you only ticketing people in certain wards of the city? Those kind of things is what I want us to look at and reviewing people. And that's police, that's for anybody, that's the same thing for our teachers. Because I can't really get involved in if you're a racist or not, and really I don't care. What I care about is how you do the job I'm paying you to do. So those are the measures I like to look at. However, there is a very strong police union and teachers union. And those things are not within the purview now of the contract and how we review them. However, our current chief, I've spoken to him a lot about that, and he is looking at that internally. But it's very sticky when you start dealing with a union, which you can fire people for, and all that stuff gets very legal. But that is what I want us to look at. The same thing with the city and who we hire, who we fire, who we promote. Those are things that I can look at. Whether or not you're racist or not, I really don't care. Because how would I know anyway? I want you to do the job I'm paying you to do fairly for all people. And arrest all people and all those other kind of things. If I see that you're only stopping a certain race or certain gender or, you know, certain wards of town, then that's when I have a problem with it, and that's what I want us to look at.
What is your office doing to better engage people with mental illness who may get caught up in the criminal justice system?
I think a lot of people don't realize, as we talk about mental illness, mental health a lot, what impact that it has on our criminal justice system. There is a disproportionate number of people who come into the criminal justice system who are dealing with a mental illness. We talk a lot about substance use disorder. One of the things we're big believers in data in the state's attorney's office. We pride ourselves on being the most transparent prosecutor's office in the country. We've released, at this point, 8 years of felony case level data. And what we've been able to determine in Cook County, with all of the narrative about who we are, most people don't know 40% of our cases are drug cases. 40% of all the cases that come through Cook County on an annual basis. When we delve down into that, 60% of the drug cases are possession cases. When you delve down into that, what we find is that we have a lot of people who are dealing with who have substance use disorder and a mental illness. And they use substances to be able to either self-medicate, or this is part of how they deal with what they have going on. And we don't talk enough about it. There's not enough mental health providers within the communities to be able to provide treatment for folks. And so what happens is, and that also shouldn't be decoupled from housing issues. We have a lot of people who are in our county jail who are there for drug possession cases, who have mental health issues, who are also homeless. And what happens, I use the example, when I used to take the train going to and fro work, there would be a man who had passed out in front of one of the coffee shops on the way. His pants had almost fallen all the way off of him. He was passed out. And there were people who were quite disturbed because here he was passed out. I see his genitalia. Call the police. Our instinct is to call the police. Yes, he's trespassing because he's blocking the business, but we know that his challenges are not criminal. He's not a threat to us. He is ill. And there are two places that we take people who are in that condition: the county hospital or the county jail. Both of them are extraordinarily expensive. One of them actually makes things significantly worse. There's no worse place for someone who has a mental health issue than a jail.
Right.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you are dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with schizoaffective disorder, any of the things on the spectrum, and we put you in a cell with someone that you don't know, and deprive you of the ability to move and walk around freely? People don't get better in jails with mental health issues. People don't get better in jail for drug treatment or for drug addiction issues because we don't treat people in jail for drug addiction issues. And so what we've tried to do is, one, illuminate the problem. People talk a lot about guns, and we should. We have a terrible gun problem here in Cook County. We have not given the attention and the focus as a community to mental health and substance use disorder. So we did a convening 3 months ago where we brought together professionals from the mental health side, the substance use disorder side, academics and researchers, to come together to say, what is the alternative to prosecution around mental health? When I said to people, what if I got out of the business of trying to figure out how to treat people's mental health in the criminal justice system? Where would we put those resources? When they closed all the mental health clinics, here's the thing. People didn't stop having mental illness.
Right on.
They didn't stop. They didn't stop. And so it should be the responsibility of all of us to require the stakeholders, whether that's the city of Evanston, the city of Chicago, or others, to invest in treatment resources in the community. We should be safeguarding against using the justice system to do that. Yes. So that's what we're doing. We have a number of specialty courts. Specialty courts are good. They're good, but not enough. The need is far too great for a court that can only deal with a few dozen people at a time, when we literally have, Sheriff Dart estimates that at least 1 in 3 detainees at the Cook County Jail have a mental health issue. 1 in 3. And so we have to really be aggressive, and that's our office's intention, is to have some real intentionality and aggressiveness of saying we have to treat mental health and substance use disorder as a real alternative to prosecution.
In light of the recent Supreme Court decision, what is your office doing to better support immigrant families?
So, obviously, my role is just here in the city of Evanston. So, I was involved somewhat in the public charge in my other job with the commissioner at Cook County. I will just give you my 2 cents on Evanston and immigrants, which is we're not nearly doing as much as we could be doing. But I know that's also can be kind of tense for people because some folks feel like I've been here 100 years and you haven't done for me either. So I do get that. I will say that I know, particularly as a parent, what the district does. So I, am here in South Evanston. There are several agencies that serve immigrant families, and they have housing in South Evanston. So they have children, and those children, most of which go to Chute Elementary. And the district's policy is all those children are in the same room together, or they are in English-speaking rooms, depending on their level and their abilities. So that means we have students who have come from, like, Cameroon, who speak no English, who are sitting in a room with other immigrants who speak no English and are probably not from Cameroon, or sitting in the math class with my daughter in Algebra 7 or whatever they're taking now. And I think that the district, I've had this conversation with the district, their thought is, well, they're kids, they have access to education, we don't have teachers who speak all these languages, which I understand. But it's like we're just sticking kids here, no process of where they have come from, the journey they have made to get here. Some of them have never experienced a winter, let alone our brutal winters. And then we stick them in a class where they are not getting anything because they don't speak the language. And I honestly didn't know this, I will tell you, like probably you all did, until my daughter, who's now a junior, came home, and she was, I think, in 6th grade, and talked about a boy she was trying to reach out to because he had come, just on a Wednesday or whatever. I can't remember where he was from, but she said she realized he didn't speak any English. And I think they were in geometry or something, which she was struggling with. And she kept saying, well, why would they put him in here? He doesn't even speak English. Not he's not welcome, but he's not gathering anything. And she said he kind of looked like a deer in the headlights. And so she was trying to reach out to him at lunchtime in a very American way that he couldn't comprehend. And she just talked about him constantly because she just couldn't understand why he wasn't with a social worker, why he wasn't getting any services. We would give him we as a school would give him a bag of food on Friday and send him home and see you again on Monday. And so I can tell you that I think in the American culture, our thought process is you've gotten here, so you make it, you figure it out. And that might be one thing for adults who made the choice to get here, but we have a lot of children who come with their families for a lot of different reasons, and they didn't have a choice. And the way that we welcome them says a lot about us as a city and as a culture. Another thing, and this maybe is not immigrant, but second languages, the city of Evanston does not have a language translation policy. We have lots of folks who don't speak English at all, let alone read English, and we don't translate everything. So we say pay your water bill, but figure it out, it's all in English. Or pay your parking ticket or get the boot, but it's in English. But you can use the app if you have a phone. So there's a lot of things we do under the assumption that everybody is brilliant and financially set and speaks English and is on the same level, and then we penalize you when you don't get it. So for 2 years I've been saying, why don't we translate stuff? And I get, it's expensive. And I say, well, so are the taxes. I mean, I just don't understand how you expect people to feel like they belong here, let alone navigate our processes, and we don't even bother to translate into Spanish, which we know we have people who speak Spanish. Probably trying to learn English, but speak Spanish. Yeah. So I think we have to, again, think about how we're treating people. Think about, what we're doing to say you're welcome here. And yes, we want you to participate in this community and help us have a safe community.
Very quickly on the public charge rule, prior to the ruling the other day by the Supreme Court, our office sued the Trump administration for an injunction in imposing the public charge rule here. And we were successful, and we did that with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. And it was the first time that our office had used the power of our civil division to sue the president's administration for these horrific policies. Right now, the injunction is still in place in Illinois in light of what's happened with the Supreme Court. We're waiting and seeing what happens with that. But I do think it's really important that we've used our office, particularly for immigrant communities, in the wake of this really monstrous administration. As many of you know, days after President Trump took office, he instituted the travel ban. And what people have to understand, particularly for communities that were impacted by that, they then makes them even more vulnerable to crime. You know, the people who will then try to exploit the fear of those and try to get them to, you know, for scams, right? I can get you your papers, I can get you someone, making them more and more vulnerable. So we also set up a hotline almost immediately so that in multiple languages, so that folks who felt that they were being susceptible to scams in the light of that could call us and we can investigate. In addition, we also saw an influx of the use of ICE raids. ICE was showing up at this president's behest at courthouses. Why this is significant is we have victims of violent crimes who perhaps you had an issue in domestic violence court. We were seeing our victims not come to court because they'd seen in other places across the country that ICE was outside the courthouse. And so the chilling effect was that we had people who were so afraid, who were suffering in silence because of the tactics of ICE. And so we made very public, everywhere I go, I remind and tell people the Cook County State's Attorney's Office does not cooperate with ICE. We do not cooperate with ICE. The president is very frustrated with Cook County and frustrated with me personally because we won't do that. It has an absolute chilling effect on the ability for us to do our jobs. And so for us, making sure that our immigrant communities, because again, healthy, thriving communities are safer. And you are not healthy or thriving if you are afraid to leave your home. You are not healthy or thriving if you're afraid to drop off your children at school, because what we were seeing in other parts of the country was they were raiding places and you were taking children's parents away. So then parents weren't sending their children to school and they were hunkering down. And so we've been very affirmative on our push to make sure that our immigrant communities were well represented. We also have what we call U visas that allow for us to petition on folks' behalf to be able to get visas to stay in this country if they've been victims of crime. We have quadrupled the number of U visas that this administration has given over the past, just in the last year. And that is our continued commitment that this office will protect everyone, no matter of your citizen status.
There are concerning numbers of suspensions of Black and brown students in our schools. What is your office doing to better engage with school districts to try to decrease these numbers?
So again, one of the things that the Youth and Young Adult Division is doing is trying to not only work with centers like Moran to create alternatives to suspension, but we've also taken another step. We go out to the alternative schools where a lot of these students have been expelled to or are just sitting at getting out of school at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and you know they're not really not being productive. We're working with the teachers. We've created partnerships also with the deans at ETHS so that we could try and get these young individuals back into mainstream schools so that they're not just wasting away, so that when they get out of school at 12 o'clock, they're not just hanging around the neighborhood, checking car doors, which leads to them, you know, having negative interactions with law enforcement. So we're doing things like that, trying to be very, very proactive, trying to stop and negate young individuals from just going into the school to prison pipeline. So that's one of the things that we're doing, and we do think that is very important, as State's Attorney Foxx touched on earlier, is to have a more of a restorative approach, allowing, you know, things to be reconciled differently. We're dealing with a situation where students made a video waving around handguns, doing things that they are emulating from mass media imagery, which we found to be another problem. You know, a lot of people, they're being silly, they're being kids, but they're doing what they see the rappers do on TV, and they're emulating this in real life. And this is consequently, the ramifications are expulsion from school and different things like that. And so we're trying to be proactive and, you know, get in tune with them, letting them know, like, hey, this can result in you not being in school for a year. This can result in you not being on the basketball team and so on and so forth. But it's sitting down with the individuals and doing peace circles and doing restorative circles so that they can know not only that the behavior is negative, but who the behavior is affecting. How does grandma feel when she sees you on here? You know, different things like that. Letting them know that what you view on mass media is fiction. It's not reality. And so just addressing things like that, trying to be very, very proactive, but also taking a restorative approach in the school with the deans and with the administrators, people that are making these policies, trying to, you know, break down some of those barriers.
I can tell you a little bit about what Opal does. Obviously, I'm not in charge of the schools and city council. We do a lot of what you saw on the screen. Usually, to start off with, Alice is our data queen, and we do a lot of FOIAs over there. Sometimes they'll just call Alice and ask her what she wants, but we do a lot of FOIAs over there because that's how do you know what's happening, right? So we look at a lot of numbers, we publish numbers, we ask them about numbers. District 202 actually is doing a little better, but 65, I mean, we spend, you know, someone usually from Opal's at a school board meeting every Monday night, and that's been like that for the last 4 or 5 years. And so we kind of stay in their face and say, what are you doing about this? What's happening? And they've made some changes, you know, in terms of restorative justice and, you know, not just going right to suspension or disciplining of students. The harder question we always ask is how many kids are getting those ORDs and just, they're not suspended so they don't come up on the discipline report, but they're still not in the classroom. And then what does that say about that teacher and her classroom management, how she's related to these students, how much learning time are they missing by being in the office? So that's what we do. We try to really push them, and then again, because we're political, we try to get like-minded people in the school board seats so that they are making the decisions that we think are actually serving the population a lot better. And I think we probably would say that shame has really helped us. Because, you know, here in Evanston, we have a vision of ourselves, and out there you say something different. So I think our best game has been shame, and just saying, hey, these are just the numbers. We just put them in the round table. You know, these are the public numbers. And so that really, I think, more than anything, has helped us to get some momentum over there, because people want to be seen, and, you know, no one wants to be called a racist or anything else. So people will kind of make some changes. But we still have a very, very long way to go. I would say probably most of you all could go to some of our middle schools, and depending on how they're run, you go to the principal's office or the room right next to the principal's office. It looks probably like an interrogation room. It's got a chair and some tables and one window, and you will see who's sitting in there. And then, because you are a taxpayer and a parent, you just say, hey, what are those kids doing back there? And you just let them answer. Because they should be our kids. You know, they're not our kids, but we are paying for them to be educated. And no one's being educated in those little spaces that we have in our buildings.
What do you think are local legislation ideas that would have maximum positive impact on community safety?
So, you know, you could always do more with more money if you spend it wisely. So in Evanston we passed, and I know we have always the fair tax question coming, but in Evanston we passed progressive real estate tax. So if your building sells for over $5 million, you pay more in your real estate transfer tax. You know, we could use that for affordable housing. We haven't made that choice yet, but that would be one way in which, you know, the wealthy are passing it down, and we can actually get some affordable housing here. You know, I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about buildings and what they look like and how tall they can be, but in order for us to generate more income, you know, in the general fund, and then use that appropriately, we have to get more revenue. And we don't sell stuff, we don't make stuff. We only have land and citizens. And Lord knows no one wants their property bill to be higher. So we can do that by having some commercial developments that then pay a steep amount of real estate tax. Again, I say that understanding that I am then responsible for answering you as to how to spend those funds. I would love us to push more for line item spending. So if we say if we sold a property and it's $5 million, that money goes towards something specific that you can see. It doesn't just go in the general fund and then we have to deal with raises and lawsuits and whatever else. So when we thought about selling the library parking lot, I was very clear that I would only do that if that money was going to go to something tangible. So if we sell the parkland, that money should go to repairing parks or restorative justice or whatever it's going to be. But if you've come to city council, you know we don't sell property very often because people come out and they are not happy about that. But I think we're going to have to really think past what the city has looked like for 20 years. Because I always tell people, you know, there's a lot of charming cities. When I go to my husband's family's house down in Urbana and they are sitting there empty as could be. Charming, small buildings, antique stores and theaters with the marquees, but there's 5 people in the town. So I think we have to think a little bit different. I also take full responsibility that we have to spend a lot wiser. I take very seriously people's property tax bills, which from your property tax bills, the city only gets 16%. So remember that, 16%. We're not raking it in, but it is a substantial amount of money that we have to be wise in spending. And if the community tells us, hey, restorative justice is important, you should see that on the line item in our budget. The other issue back to challenge you all is that people don't always come to our budget meetings. So you don't know what we spend until Evanston Now or somebody puts something out there, and usually it's after the fact. So if you come to my ward meeting, you know we start talking about the budget in the summer, and I tell you, do not come to me in January with a budget issue because the budget is finished. So we all have to be responsible as well for paying attention to who you elect, what they're approving, what we're spending our money on. I mean, that's part of your job as the voters, and I know people in this last 3 years have come out and yelled at us for a number of things for a very long time. But they also are a pretty small amount of people who come. And I give them their credit, even though I don't always agree with them, that they come and they show up. But you do have to pay attention, and you do have to hold your people accountable. If you vote for somebody they're not doing the right thing, they should be out of there. Don't come complain to me. I mean, you need to work with the people in your ward. They need to represent you appropriately. And as I always say, Mr. Gibbs will tell you, if you don't like it, run yourself. I mean, it's the honest truth. But, you know, I'm in the 9th ward. So we got our own problems, and I'm happy to help you, but I'm not your representative most times. So that's what we can do locally. There's a lot of big ideas. We have to have the courage on our side as elected officials to make the big ideas, even if people are screaming at us, because we know it's better for our community. But then also you all have to come and hold us accountable when we do something that's really egregious.
Thank you. Lastly, one of the things I would say in regard to community safety is I think that the community as a whole, not as a whole, I'm sorry, I think that the community should have, in some capacity, should have some involvement in the officers that are selected through our police academy. I think that we can't wait on the back end and say, well, we can't be reactive and say, well, you know, this person is like this or this person's like that. I think that we need to make critical implementations at the police academy, seeing who's policing our communities. You know, are they going to be a good fit for our community? And I think that we should have some sort of community panel that's involved in the selection process, because that's another, that's someone else who's involved with our children. That's someone else who's, involved in our community. And if we want to truly affect change and we want to talk about what that really looks like, we're going to have to take a hard look at that as well. And then to some points that we made here earlier, we're going to have to start being a lot more equitable and inclusive in our practices in the city of Evanston. We can't just, on one end of the dais say one thing, but then on the other end of the dais do another. And I think that we really, really got to hold the city accountable in that regard. Thank you.
I would just remind us, again, I know I've said it already, that healthy, thriving communities are safer communities. And I think I want us to be able to, as we said earlier, have an honest conversation about how we view safety and how we view the people who come through our justice system. I go to rooms all the time, and when I say to people that prisons don't necessarily make us safer, people get a little in their feelings. Because we have been taught the notion that, you send someone to prison, somehow we're all safer. 90% of people who go to prison come out. 90%. There's a very small percentage of people who stay in prison for the rest of their lives. And people talk about recidivism rates all the time. There's no other business model that we've allowed to be so horribly flawed than a system that we use that we know that most of the people who come out of it are going to fail within 3 years. And yet, that is the only thing that we cling to. And so I think we have to have real honest reckoning conversations about what community looks like, who is included in it, and what does shared responsibility for all of our safety look, what is that, how do we achieve that? And I think the overuse of incarceration, the overuse of the justice system, where everybody gets in, where there's no distinction between those who really, really annoy us, who get on our absolute nerves and we wish we never had to see again, versus people who are dangerous. Because we have too many people in our criminal justice system who are really annoying, but could be dealt with in the community. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But we have to demand that. We have to demand differently. We have to be able to say, particularly when it comes to young people. I have 4 teenage girls at home, right? We have to use our common sense. I can tell my kids 17 different ways, don't do that. And they do it. And you punish them. You know, we take phones, right? Because that's the lifeline. And then, you know, my daughter today, her room looks a hot mess. I just took her phone 3 days ago. I found some hot Cheetos under her desk. Like, this is what young people do. But we can't reflexively say when somebody else's young person does something, throw them away. We have to use and look at our criminal justice system of what would we want for our loved ones. What will we want for our love? What will we want for that person? I talk very openly about the fact that I have relatives who have had substance use issues for years. And what I know is that there is no real rock bottom. But I also know that if she were stuck in jail, she wasn't going to get better. And like, what does it then look like for us to be able to use our personal experiences and say, I want to treat even that person who seems most unfamiliar to me like family and find a solution for them because it makes us all safer. We must disabuse ourselves of a us versus them, good versus bad. And I say this as a prosecutor who is in an adversarial system, that we have to care just as fervently for the person who has caused harm as the person who's been harmed. Very last thing. We, in our Restorative Justice Court, we talked about it earlier. I went to our graduation of one of our first cohorts a couple months ago. And we had a young man who spoke so eloquently and so beautifully about what it meant for him to have committed a crime. And that the people in the state's attorney's office, judges, everyone was wrapping our arms around him, praying for him to be able to make something of himself. That we were pouring into him despite the thing that he had done wrong. And we were celebrating, we were jubilant, we were very excited for this young man. And I got the news this morning that he was killed last night. And here's the thing about it, and I say this all the time, a lot of our defendants are victims. And a lot of our victims have been defendants. And what made me really sad about it was, one, I remember like feeling close and connected to this man who had done wrong and was trying his best to do right, and what it looked like and felt for him for us to pour into him. And then when I went back to read about his death today, it was just anonymous. He was anonymous. And we have to do better than that. Our safety, our community absolutely depends on the interconnection between each and every one of us, and not for us to be able to just disregard segments who we don't know and understand. That is what's required of us.
So in Evanston, there's a lot we can do. We have a ton of resources here. We are not short of resources. We are not short of money. We are not short of time. If you've been at one of these, Evanston meetings, and we're going to start a new coalition, and there's 25,000 people there. And you think, well, don't they have a job? And then we're going to meet and have a steering committee, and we're going to have a task force and a fundraiser. So we have plenty of time if we would use it wisely. If we would all think through, what do we want our community to look like, and how am I going to participate in that? I mean, and being honest, not just like, what do I want my kids and their friends to have? Right? Because if we're really honest, the folks I went to high school with who weren't good in high school, who didn't do well, who were in and out with the police and everything else, they still here. Where are they going? Where are you going? You're still here. Maybe some might still live with their parents or have a family home, but some are couch surfing. When I'm down at Connections, I see people I went to high school with. I'm 45. They're here. So this idea that if we can just move them along, as Kim said, where are we moving them to? And when they get out of Cook County, where do you think they're going? I mean, they're not flying to Atlanta. So, I mean, I think we have to really be honest about these people, like she said, the others, and the others are us. Just by the grace of God, we're not in jail. So I really, from city council, there's a lot we can do. I feel like my main job, particularly these last, 6 months, has been just trying to keep Nathan here. And when I see stuff, I call Nathan. I'll go up to a kid in a minute, but I'm like, ooh, he look kind of rough. Let me call Nathan. And Nathan has come to GGOs. I mean, Nathan is on it. His team is fabulous. And there's other times where I see somebody and I'm like, let me call the police because not I want them to be arrested, but I'm worried about a safety issue. But I will say in a minute, don't send officer such and such over here. Or I'll call the police who I know have their cell phone and say, are you at work or who do you recommend I send? When I was downtown working with my colleague Michelle, who's back there, we had a young man who came in and he was not a small gentleman. And we go out, hey, how you doing? And he was right here and not small. And he was having the biggest breakdown I had ever seen, telling me spaceships were coming. I mean, he was in some kind of mental health state. And we don't have no back door, Michelle, right? We don't have a back door. So we thought, what are we going to do with this man? He clearly needs help beyond what we're able to give him. But we did not feel comfortable calling the police. And I pay the police officers in my job. Because he presented, if you weren't, he presented in a way. So I got a police officer on the phone and she's talking me through what to do and what to say. And Michelle called some other people. And we finally got him to a place where he was, we thought, hopefully willing to go out and get mental health triage. But that broke our hearts. He was, 21, I think, Michelle? And every day we were like, what happened? We were Googling him, trying to figure out what happened to him. But we have some officers that are great. We do. And we have to celebrate the ones we do. We have some teachers that are great. But in every job, you have people who just suck. I mean, it's human nature. So Nathan's thing, we do have a civil service commission. We got a gazillion commissions, but that one does look at and talk to people who are applying for police. So that's something you can do if you're interested in that, and they give a recommendation to the police chief as to who to hire. But we have some great officers, so we should celebrate them and make sure they're the officers who we call if we can or we request. And we have to think about honestly who we calling the police on. Let's not be dishonest about that, who we're calling the police on or who we're giving a pass to. But the other thing I would just say in my role in city council is really, I really need you all to really pay attention. I know some of y'all are there and you're hardcore and you're frustrated. You've been with us forever, Ms. Payton. Yeah. Some of y'all are there all the time, and I applaud that, even if we don't agree, because you came. But more of you guys have to pay attention. Just because you vote for somebody, we're not a puppet. People voted for me, and then they say, I ain't voting for you no more. Well, that's, okay, that's fine, it's democracy. But you have to hold me accountable, but you also have to understand that I'm a human, and so I have a different perspective sometimes on things. Now, I try to be honest and tell you what my perspective is, but so the 9 of us have very different life experiences, very different things that are meaningful to us. I don't think that I work with people who are, not ill, but evil people, but we have different perspectives. It might not match up with yours. But I want us to be a city that can progress. We have to progress past what we used to be. We have to progress to a place that all people can come here and be welcome. We have to progress these schools that, Sean Reardon telling us we have the brightest and best kids in USA. If you look on the second page, it's only the affluent white kids who are the best and brightest. And if you're affluent and white, your kid's going to be fine, so help somebody else. But if you're not willing to do that, then I don't know where we're going to go as a city. And past the idea of safety, how we're going to just live here together without imploding. So safety, there's a lot to do with safety. My job is really to spend money wisely, spend money on things that are going to keep us safe in a variety of ways. And then my job in Opal is really to keep pushing the school board and making sure our kids are safe, and not physically safe, but emotionally and mentally safe in those spaces. That you can be black and have natural hair and, not being said that your hair is in the way. Or you can be a black boy and maybe don't want to sit in the seat for that boring lesson and you're not sent to the office. Those are safety issues as well that we need to be paying attention to and doing something about.
Before we take off, we were very privileged to have all of you speak, and we thank you very much. It's my job to give a call to action. And as State's Attorney Foxx was speaking, what struck me was the words of Brian Stevenson when he said, "We are more than the worst thing we've ever done." And that really, that really came to me as we were listening to some of this. Our call to action tonight is a call for racial equity. We believe the best way to help our most vulnerable residents is by providing resources like equitable access to education, jobs, and social services. The only way to do this is through a fair tax. We hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and be sure to get involved with outreach programs. Opal, Reclaim Evanston, please get involved and mark your calendars for upcoming elections. Thank you and good night.